Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first episode of 2025. This is Talking Business with Chad and Mike, and we are beginning the new year here with our guest from New York City. And Michael, introduce our guest to us, and let's kick off the new year with the first episode.
Well, Happy New Year, Chad, and Happy New Year, Eric, and Happy New Year to everybody out there in our audience on LinkedIn Live. So I have the pleasure of introducing Eric Sarver, who is a Manhattan-based employment law and business law attorney who counsels, defends, and represents small to mid-sized businesses in numerous different industries. The Sarver law firm helps small and mid-sized companies navigate their ever-changing of federal, state, and municipal labor and employment laws. They defend employers and management regarding employment discrimination, wage and hour violations, paid leave issues, breach of employment, contracts, commission disputes, and related employment litigation and compliance matters. Now, full disclosure to the audience, I've been in numerous networking groups with Eric in the past, and I've always been impressed with his knowledge of employment law. So let's get started. Of course, we always start with an icebreaker question. So, Chad, what's the question for today? By the way, I don't know the question either.
We'll both be pleasantly surprised then. Okay. Nice to see you again, Michael. And Chad, nice to see you as well. Thanks for having me on the show.
You're welcome. Okay, so today's icebreaker is if you could witness the creation of one of these three events and items, which one would you select? The Sistine Chapel, the Constitution of the United States, or the Great Pyramids of Egypt?
Hold on a second.
Oh, that's a good one. That's a good.
You know what? Creation of these events and items. Which would it be? The Sistine Chapel,
the Constitution, or the Great Pyramids?
I might surprise you guys here because you might expect me as an employment lawyer to say the Constitution, but I would really want to witness the creation of the pyramids. I want to see how people worked together on that, what they were doing, how they interacted, what life was like back then. So I think I'd want to see that last one for sure, Chad. Yeah.
Very cool. What are you thinking, Michael?
Well, I actually was initially thinking of the Constitution, and then I said, actually, the Sistine Chapel, I would love to see Michelangelo at work.
Wow. Yeah.
That would be not that I wouldn't want to see the either two. So, but gee, that would be marvelous to just see this guy on his back on the scaffolding, painting. And I've been to the Sistine Chapel, and it's remarkable.
And just to think of all the potential employment law violations at either of those work sites.
Could you imagine, right? Did they use child labor? Did they work overtime and not pay time and a half? Or didn't have time and a half laws back in those days?
Right. Yes. And think about that at the pyramids.
Right. Well, then you get some real issues. Yeah, we can go on all day about that, right? If we had to, but.
Well, I guess we're going to have one of each because I would go with the Constitution. Just to observe the process that went through with drafting that, creating it, the disagreements, the compromises, I think a lot of times, whether it's with the Constitution or any great work of art or something like that, architecture, whatever it might be, a lot of times we don't think about what went into making it, how it was created, and we just kind of enjoy. I guess the fruits of the labors, for lack of a better term.
Yes. Now, I have a fun, quick story for you guys on many, many years ago. This is probably before your time, since I seem to be the older guy here. There was a program called You Are There. And Walter Cronkite, famous, newscaster, he was the narrator of this program. And so basically what would be is that it would literally take you on the scene of a great event, just like the Sistine Chapel or the Constitution or the Great Pyramids or Napoleon at Waterloo, and actually seeing the actors in the scene. And at the end of the show, he'd say, "And what kind of a day was it? A day like all days, only you are there."
Wow.
Sorry, into our time, and I said be brief. Here I am, just taking up time. I apologize.
Totally fine. Not to worry.
So we've done the icebreaker, and so now let's get to. We've got 4 very deep questions for you, Eric. It's not a test. We just want to see, learn a lot and have our audience get the benefit of your knowledge. So, first question. How has the remote or hybrid workforce and changing communication styles impacted employment law?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the direct answer I could think of is that the hybrid and remote workforce has caused more gray areas, sort of more shades of gray when it comes to interpreting and applying different federal, state, and employment laws. And it's also caused more employer side error in that regard. Um, that could be a whole seminar, but to cut to the chase, I can give you three quick examples if you'd like, right?
Yeah.
Number one, sure, workers' compensation law. Used to be a little more cut and dry pre-remote. If we were having this conversation in 2002, let's say, pretty clear about when an employee's injury was covered or not, if they were performing their work, if they were on the job, if they were on the job location, etc. So if Susan was getting a cup of coffee, let's say in the break room, and she slipped and fractured her ankle, covered by workers' comp. But what happens now with the remote and hybrid workforce when employees might be, let's say, forced to work from home? If a company has a mandatory work from home, they create a de facto office in a sense. So now we're seeing all these cases and questions come up in the workers' comp board and hearings and court cases where it's like Susan was actually carrying a printer from her basement up to her home office and she tripped and fell. Was that covered? Was she in the course of her business? And like, what if Susan was working at a Starbucks, and taking a coffee break and got hurt? Is Starbucks responsible? So my point is, it's a little more gray area because it's not so clear cut when someone's on the job. One more brief example, for example, might be when it comes to employee surveillance and monitoring. This is an issue that a lot of state laws cover, and a lot of states will have laws like New York, Connecticut, Delaware, Texas, California. All say you have to notify employees when you're monitoring them. That could be like video surveillance, right? Or it could be their internet usage and their email and their computers. And that was kind of clear cut when people commute to the office. You get to your desk, you say hi to everyone, and you're at your workspace, right? There you are. With the remote workplace, a lot more employees are using their private laptops, right, to do work. So when do you have the legal right under state or even federal law to monitor them? And when do you notify them? And, also I'd say that the work schedule has become much more fluid. People don't often just go in, do work, and go home. People are working, then they're putting in a load of laundry, right? Picking up their kid, then they're working at night. So can an employer monitor at night if that's the employee has an expectation of privacy? So these are questions about that, virtual workplace harassment, what's harassment or not, if you're on screen versus in person, all makes to the point that, or supports the point, I should say, that in the remote workforce, it's just a little more of a shade of gray, less black and white answers.
That's great. That's really very, boy, I'm not sure. I always wanted to be a lawyer, but I'm not sure it was an employment lawyer, but wow.
Well, a following question I have with that one, Eric, and that I've had come up from time to time, which I do different types of executive and communications coaching with companies, is if someone's working out of their home, what about the utilities? Like I've seen that conversation come up, like as far as paying for the electricity, paying for their internet access and stuff like that. As far as like, is that something that can be billed out, to an employer, or is that one of those gray areas, or is it just not a question at all?
I think that's definitely one of those gray areas, Chad, because you look to like employer policies about how they define their expenses and reimbursable expenses. You look to, again, let's say if an employer is making someone get like a certain camera equipment, let's say, to do their work at home, that could be something that arguably you'd have to reimburse them for. Like if it's a necessary part of the job and they must get it, I would say there's a good argument that if you don't pay them, and there's some states that say this, it's as if you're taking away from their wages, right? Because, they have to pay out of pocket for what they would have paid for in the office. But it does get great because, I use my computer for work. I also might use it to watch Netflix. So the person has value. Definitely a gray area. And one thing Michael said a moment ago about employment law, there are a lot of shades of gray in employment law. that have existed. I've been doing this since 1999, and there have been shades of gray then. I just think it's becoming more and more of it depends on the circumstances scenario with technology and changes.
Well, this is probably going to make things more gray,
Mhm.
but how's the evolution of different aspects of, culture and society, been impacting employment law and, just the conflicts that arise and how they're resolved today?
Yeah, that's a great question, Chad. Think about that for a minute. I would say that one big cultural change, right, that's impacting employment law is that there's a much more heightened awareness around issues of implicit bias and microaggressions, right? And how those could be examples of discrimination. So what's happening is it's sort of like the net is cast wider. There's a bigger scope out there of what kind of conduct in the workplace might be deemed unlawful, discrimination, sexual harassment, and so forth. So cultural change is about cultural norms as to what we do and don't accept as much anymore. Off-color jokes, for example, are increasing the number of discrimination suits. That's one example. I think another cultural change is that with the heated political climate, you have a balancing of two different things, right? You don't want to silence certain employees in their opinions over others. You might be seen as discriminating against them based on their political activities, right, or their speech. And speech is protected by the government, not this private industry, but there are some New York State other laws that protect employees from discrimination based on what they do and don't do off work. So I feel like with all the polarization now, on the other hand, if you don't, say, chastise certain speech in the office, other employees might say, hey, this person is saying things that I deem are racist or xenophobic. And so we're seeing a lot of laws and issues come up around that. And I get a lot of calls all the time from clients on how to address that issue.
So supposing the employer says there's I don't want any discussion of politics on our Zoom calls.
Yes.
Team meetings, etc., and basically says, look, guys, let's not talk politics. And somebody has an objection to that, saying, well, that's imposing on my speech. I have an opinion. I want to express it. Even if I'm not asked for it, I want to give it. What happens then?
So this is a great question, Michael, because this comes up a lot with clients of mine. I think that it's fine if the blanket policy is that no one talks politics, whether they, are, super liberal, progressive, or very far right conservative. The thing there is that you're not silencing certain groups over others, right? So by making it more blanket, generic, you're sort of keeping everyone on the same level. And also you have a legitimate business reason for that, right? That you can say, hey, it's not that I don't like you or your views. It's that we have a lot of work to do here. And we should be spending our Zoom call talking about, how we're going to sell this product or how we're going to,
I got that, but supposing somebody crosses the line, what happens then?
Can you give you like an example? When you say cross line, you mean in terms of like expressing their opinions when they shouldn't be?
Let's just say that there's an employee who consistently expresses their political opinions, and somebody calls the boss and says, hey, boss, so-and-so is always expressing their opinion, and I don't think it's fair. I'm not interested. I don't want to hear it. What are you going to do about it?
Right. And so, if you have that policy in place, and again, the key with policies is that you want to back them up by a legitimate business reason. So if someone is breaking that policy, my thought is you approach that violator in a similar way as if someone kept breaking the policy about, you can't listen to loud music at your desk in the office, or, right, you can't, come in at 9:20 when the day starts at 9, or a dress code, you can't wear flip-flops to the office. I think that it's okay to take that employee aside who's, the violator and tell them this is not okay to do. I would also add, though, that, sometimes I want to learn more about the specifics, because if the person's politics are, that they just love Teddy Roosevelt and can't stop talking about him, might not have a necessary like a implication of a discriminatory belief, but certain other beliefs might be expressed, and someone might say, hey, those beliefs are very offensive to me as a woman, or to me as if the person's gay or if they're African American. So I think we need to look at the specific language being spoken, and then we can address it based on what they're saying, if that makes sense to you, right? It makes sense?
It does.
Yeah.
Chad, you look very pensive. What do you think about it?
It's very interesting because I come out of the IT world. Originally, I worked in that for about 15 years. And it kind of seems like a lot of the bad habits originated out of that industry, as far as especially kind of fostering people maybe to express non-work related ideas, in those environments, like specifically like out in, Silicon Valley in the West Coast.
Yes.
And then like within the past couple of years, it seems like it has gotten to the point where the companies now are trying to reinstate some of these rules, for various reasons, because it's basically you kind of, and in some organizations, you almost had like a wild west, and where things were getting very unproductive and, a lot of conflict going on. But originally, it was done in the battle for talent about, we want everybody to express themselves,
right.
But then there was kind of that loss of context.
Right.
And they're trying to reel that back. I mean, do you see that perspective? Do you see that in like that industry versus other industries, or is it kind of across, different types of organizations?
Well, I definitely know what you're talking about, Chad. I definitely see it with my tech clients for sure. And I'd also say it happens a lot in construction settings, in insurance. I've found this to be, call it what it is, whether it's coincidental or not, but often in male-dominated industries, there's a reining in of that Wild West mentality. And I think this comes in line with the cultural change that it used to be, I think, in our culture in the workplace, there was an unspoken rule that as long as, Bill or, Susan or someone, as long as they produced and hit their numbers and got their sales and made the money, that, you'd excuse their indiscrepancies, right? And I think that as the labor and employment laws got more stringent and they started to have higher penalties, more damages available, like punitive damages for discrimination cases, companies started to get hit with those large lawsuits and started to say, maybe this isn't the Wild West. It's like that old show House. House was a doctor. Whenever I watch it, I cringe at the employment law issues, but he gets away with murder because in the end, he's the guy that solves a big medical dilemma. And I think our culture is shifting to say, hey, if you're offending other people on a regular basis, creating a hostile work environment, we don't care as much if you're doing great work because you're going to take us down in terms of morale, talent, lawsuits, etc.
Okay, that's really wild. Yeah, I know. I ran a company from 1985 to 2000. It was a different, very different world.
Yes.
So our next question is, what are the differences between HR and employment law? When do you need an HR manager or a fractional HR person? And when do you need an employment lawyer on speed dial?
Yes. Wow. To boil that down, the harder part of answering that question is to boil it down to a succinct answer. I would say that first I'll start off by saying there are a lot of similarities and overlap in what we do. So HR consultant or HR manager and employment lawyer, we both handle questions of compliance. We both draft employee handbooks and offer letters and onboarding documents. So we both kind of deal in information, giving that business information about what laws to follow, et cetera. I think the difference is that, number one, most obvious difference, right? An HR person cannot practice law. So if a company is being sued by an ex-employee, have your employment lawyer on speed dial. If there's a threat of a lawsuit even, get that employment lawyer involved. Or a Department of Labor audit, or some kind of adverse proceeding. But taking it a step further, I think another time to have an employment lawyer on board is when there's any kind of sensitive termination or situation. Because remember, HR, a lot of times the focus is on how can we give our client information about talent, recruiting, with law to follow. And we lawyers, we often look to how can we look deep what's going on here? How can we avoid a situation? I can give you like a really quick example if you'll indulge me. This perfectly, I think, illuminates the difference and why you need one, not the other. or when you need one, not the other. Have a client. She and I are working. She runs a small company. And we work on a few issues. And she said, by the way, I'm firing so-and-so. And I asked my HR company, and they gave me the termination letter. Can you look it over, make sure it's correct? And I said, sure, I'll look it over. And the letter was just fine. It talked about last paycheck, right, your COBRA benefits, and what, but you're being fired for cause. So I asked the employer, well, hold on a second. Tell me about this for cause and insubordination. What was the insubordination? Why are you firing this person? Just to make sure nothing was amiss. And they said, oh, she's always, the person we're firing is the troublemaker. Well, tell me more. Well, they come in late, they do this, they do that. And they're always getting people in the break room and trying to organize them to get more raises, to get better meal breaks. They complain about the pregnant woman not getting a lactose room. They're always complaining. And I said, whoa. I said, take that termination letter, which is perfect, by the way, and throw it in the garbage or delete it. Don't send it. But the HR company just heard we're firing someone. So their mind was, here's what you need. My thought was, I'm just always worried and proactively avoiding termination or discrimination cases. I don't want them to be sued for violating the National Labor Relations Act, retaliation for organizing and such. So we had a different plan of action in place.
Something that I've seen more of, and this is before the pandemic.
Yes.
And it's just continued as well, has been the involvement of parents with adult children at the workplace.
Oh, yes, right.
It's like I have clients that had situations where, like, we were in the process of extending an offer. They were in the process of extending an offer, and they needed to negotiate the compensation. And then the father got on the phone to do the negotiation, and stuff like that. And it's just, people, their parents calling to check on the status, of an application. And
Right.
things like that. Have you had any experience with instances like that with your clients?
Chad and Michael, I've heard of those scenarios too. If I were in that employee's shoes, I would cringe. I think it'd be kind of embarrassing to have your parent, sort of infantilize you like that. I have heard of these situations. I don't. To me, it doesn't set off any alarm bells in terms of employment law, like a labor violation or discrimination. I think, it's kind of in poor business form and poor practice. And maybe it's is that a function of parents just not letting their children grow up? So short answer is I have seen it. I usually tell the employer, listen, you're paying the employee or hiring the employee, not their parent. And, you have every right to say to that parent, I'm sorry, per company policy, this, all candidates' salaries and compensation are strictly confidential. So you can politely eject that parent from the conversation, and maybe that child and parent should have a talk like, I'm not in 7th grade anymore, So yeah, I have seen it happen. I don't get too alarmed. Sometimes companies call me and they say the same thing. Oh, the person's mother called and said, this is a problem. Are we in trouble? And I said, you're not all in the playground together. Like, they can't ground you, right? So I would just kind of chalk it up to quirkiness and move on,
Yeah, because probably a more extreme example is one of my friends was a basic training commander in the Navy, and somehow parents are finding the phone numbers to the drill commanders.
Wow.
And calling, like, to complain about how their little junior is being treated. And it's just, it's just a bizarre extension, of that behavior where, there's these I view them as failures on the side of the parents.
Yeah.
That they're not letting people go out and live their lives. But I agree with you. If my father, number one, if I'd ever asked my father to do that, it would not have gone down well. And I would have been, so embarrassed, for something like that to have happened.
Yeah. And you see a lot in employment law, and I try to protect my clients from all scenarios. I always tell my clients, the business owners, tell me everything, don't hold back, because they might think, oh, well, this is probably no big deal. And sometimes something is a big deal. Sometimes it's not, from the perspective of, is there liability? Is there risk of a suit? Yeah, I definitely, I think, you could say that might contribute to employees struggling with expectations of adulthood, and could that lead them to become disgruntled and try to sue if they get fired? They might not have a basis. You didn't talk to my mother or father on the phone is not protected activity. So,
Well, that's a whole other conversation about Gen Y, Gen Z, and so on and so forth. But let's go back to we're going down the abyss when I said we would not do that. So let's
okay, don't want to do that. No,
it's ours. But let's go to that. Chad, do you want to ask this last question?
Oh, sure. So pull out your crystal ball, Eric, and what do you see as being some of the trends or topics that we're likely to see in the upcoming, the rest of 2025 in the upcoming year?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think one big trend to watch is the fate of non-compete clauses, non-compete agreements, right? That is, constantly in flux. The FTC tried to ban them. The court stopped it. Then there's a whole lot of stuff that I would take a long time just to get into, right? But the point is that states are starting to ban them partially. So look out for non-competes and reevaluate with your employment lawyer like myself your employment agreements, number one. Second big trend I'd say is increases in minimum wage from state to state. The federal has been very stagnant, but the state to state raises. So make sure you're paying your employees the right amount and you're aware of different amounts, different rates for different regions, like New York City and Westchester compared to upstate New York. So sometimes the rural and the urban of a place can change. That's number two, I think, right? Number three, I would say keep your eye out for salary transparency laws. A lot of times companies don't know. They post, hey, we're looking for, a CPA, a plumber, a dentist, et cetera, a marketing guy or gal, and they don't post a salary. And many states say if you've got employees or a job opening, either external or internal, you need to post a minimum and maximum salary range for that position, or you can be sued or be fined or penalized. So, and that ties back to remote workers, because some companies say, yeah, but the person I hired was remote, they're in Montana. But if they could have done the job remotely from their apartment 3 blocks away, they're covered by that law in that state. So, and I think I'd say maybe just two more quick things might be look out for expansions of paid leave, both more paid leave, like more paid sick days, more paid family leave, and different types of leave. I don't know if some people realize that, voting rights leave, stalking and violence prevention leave. Someone calls you and says, I got to take off to go to court, testify against my ex-husband, who was beating me, an abuser. You can't say, well, Susan, you better use your personal days. You have to give, in many states, that domestic violence leave off, paid leave, no questions asked. So there's that. Yeah, I think those are the big ones. Oh, and AI, probably artificial intelligence, as it comes up in hiring practices, in auditing for hiring discrimination and bias and things like that.
Wow. We've just about hit about a half hour. We could go for another hour plus.
Oh, easily. Yeah.
Deeper and deeper to some of these questions and your answers. It's been. I really appreciate the clarity in a right now the gray area of employment law. You've given us a lot of clarity in the 30 minutes that we've been talking. Thank you, Eric. Really very, very, very interesting, I have to say. I've been an employer in the past, and certainly salary transparency laws, non-compete, and an expansion of reasons to basically, paid leave, et cetera, were definitely issues way back then. And that was a long time ago. So I would imagine that things really are very complicated, very gray with the culture change, with remote, with hybrid, with even the fact that you just said something that you hire somebody remotely in Montana, you want to pay them on a pay scale for Montana, but right in your own neighborhood here in New York City, you've got any number of people that can do the same job. So should you be paying that guy in Montana the same amount as here in New York? Do you really have to do that?
Not so much you have to go by Montana's minimum wage, but if it's a salary transparency, you have to, if your state law says you must state the salary for remote or in person in the state. If the remote person could have been hired in New York, let's say, then you must give that salary range in the job posting. And that's, I think, one of the key. It is funny, Michael and Chad, where each of those issues we covered today, taken by itself, could be like a 4-hour seminar. And that's why I tell my clients, look, if you're a business owner these days, don't try to guess. Don't use Google Esquire. Don't try to use Google. Call me. I'm in New York, New Jersey. I can help you with compliance, help you with consulting, help you to cut off these problems before they become, or issues before they become problems, before you get sued or penalized because you say, I didn't know, or I didn't understand the law. So those are my last parting words, I think, to those watching. Don't try to figure it out on your own. It's a very nuanced area. I get updates every day, and I read them probably 20 minutes a day, at least on, there are multiple days a week on employment law, sometimes longer, because there's so much to know.
And that's a really good opportunity to point out neither Michael or I are attorneys or not giving legal advice.
And I'd say everything I said is not creating an attorney-client relationship and is not to be taken as legal advice as well.
Right.
I've lived in New York myself, but they didn't have that kind of disclaimer in there. But yes.
Yeah. But it's, it's really just another example of, it's the great thing about the internet is you can find out so much information, but it doesn't make you an expert.
Right.
And a lot of times people kind of fall into that trap, whatever the topic might be. You always have these instant experts running around. We did not, I guess I should say we kept our streak alive of talking about AI in our shows. I think that's been a topic in every single show that we've done. So thank you for bringing that up, Eric.
My pleasure.
And that's going to go on, I'm sure. But any closing comments as we wrap up, Eric?
Just a very quick last. Well, first I'd say thank you both. Thank you, Chad. Thank you, Michael, for having me on your show. It was a pleasure. I enjoyed talking with you both. And I hope what came across is that, I enjoy and feel passionate about employment law and will make sure that, my clients, small to mid-sized businesses in all industries in New York and New Jersey, get a fair shake, get the information, are protected, are defended, and can leave the legal to me sort of while you run your business is my parting words, I'd say. So,
Michael, closing words?
Great summary, Eric. I really appreciate that. And I'd say that I hope our audience has learned a lot and has gotten a tremendous amount of information. And I just want to say we'll be back. Chad and I will be back in a few weeks with another podcast. And we'll be doing this on a regular basis for the rest of the year, and hope more people tune in, and people like Eric and the experts that we bring in, and the conversations we have, the questions we ask, and the information that we can learn.
And for anybody that has questions for Eric, I'll be including his contact information in the show notes. So, feel free to reach out to the expert on the topic if you have other questions and inquiries. I'm sure he would be happy to discuss those points further with you.
Absolutely. I sure would. Thank you, Chad. Again, thank you, Michael.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Happy New Year again. And everybody stay safe and be well.
We'll see you soon.
Thank you all.